Será que os textos sagrados, sumérios, Bíblia e tantos outros, trazem evidências de que os seres humanos foram criados através de engenharia genética extraterrestre? Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada, aonde você estiver. Eu sou o THIAGO. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios. O meu entrevistado de hoje é um ex-policial, ex-militar, que trabalhou durante muitos anos como empreiteiro em obras do governo. De família cristã, ele começou a investigar, analisar os textos bíblicos à procura de resposta para a sua fé cristã. É o pesquisador norte-americano Jeff Cortino. Durante 2000 anos, os escritos mais antigos que a humanidade teve para explicar a sua história foram os da Bíblia. Só que em 1849, as primeiras tabuinhas cuneiformes foram desenterradas em Nínive, no Iraque. E a partir de então, a história da humanidade mudou. Inclusive, há suspeita de que tenhamos sido criados de forma genética por seres extraterrestres. Mas antes de começarmos essa entrevista com Jeff Cortino, você não se esqueça de se inscrever no canal se ainda não for inscrito. Marque também o sininho para sempre que tiver um vídeo novo, você ser avisado e não perder nada. Deixe também o seu like em todos os vídeos do canal e comente e compartilhe o vídeo para que tenhamos cada vez mais pessoas engajadas no canal e trazer mais informações para você. Então vamos para mais uma entrevista inédita e exclusiva que vai falar sobre a possibilidade de nós, seres humanos, termos sido criados geneticamente por seres extraterrestres. E isso estaria escrito em textos sagrados. Vamos então a essa entrevista com Jeff Cortino. Okay, Jeff, thank you very much for being here on my YouTube channel. It's a pleasure to have you here. And as
Thank you
we
for having me.
talked before, we're going to talk about your research and, of course, about this amazing book that you can buy it in Amazon.com.br in Brazil. You can buy it from Brazil, the Amazon from Brazil. So don't miss it. After you hear what Jeff has to say, I'm pretty sure that you want to buy this book. So, Jeffrey, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, we're going to start with the same questions that I asked to all my guests. What led you? Well, you are a biologist, and you are a former policeman, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And what led you, to research this subject?
Well, and I kind of cover that in my book. And I kind of lead, people with me as I'm discovering things. I'm telling the story of when I grew up and how my mother always, took me and my brother. It was just me and my brother. Took us to church and made sure we were always going to church and knew about the Lord's word in the Bible. And, from a young age. My father wasn't really around, so we kind of grew up fatherless. But she always made sure that we went, no matter where we went, no matter if we moved anywhere, she always made sure we went to church. But I found myself, having a lot of questions as I grew up, as probably most people do. They start reading things about the Bible and there's things in there that you have questions about. And so, I would ask my mother, she would say, go ask the pastor. Because we grew up Protestant. I ended up married a Catholic, so we went to Catholic church for a while, but I grew up Protestant. But I would go up to the pastor and say, oh, what about this? Or what about this scripture? How come that doesn't make any sense? And it was always kind of the same answer, no matter where I was. I'm 55 right now. But throughout my whole life, and even now, people would say, pray about it. And it'll come to you. Well, I don't know how many hours I spent praying, and it never came to me. So I decided to take matters in my own hands as I grew up and started to try to learn as much as possible by reading other books, trying to figure something out. I'll give you an example of some things in the Bible that didn't make sense. You know, the first thing is like Cain and Abel. When Cain killed his brother Abel, supposedly there was only 4 people on the planet, according to the Bible. There's Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. That's it. So when Cain killed his brother Abel, he was banished to the east, to the land of Nod. And then he remarries. Well, I was like, wait a minute. How can he remarry? There's nobody else on the planet. Did he marry his mother? That doesn't make any sense. So, and no one can explain that. None of the leaders of the church can explain it. But I found answers in the cuneiform tablets. And it kind of answered that question. And that's in my book too. I make sure that all the questions that I had were answered in the book. Now, every time you answer a question, anytime you answer a question, you may find the answer to that question, but it brings up, 6 or 7 more questions. It opens the door to more. So you can never really find all the answers to everything. So even now, there's still things that I have questions about, but that would be a really deep delve, and you'd have to have a pretty good understanding of everything that I've researched in order to have that discussion. And it's tough to have that discussion with some people. But anyway, it's as I grew up that happened. And if you don't mind, I'd like to tell something that was in my book.
Please.
Okay. Because I put it in there, I'll tell this story. I don't want to give away everything that's in the book, but I'll tell this story because it's a major thing that happened to me in my life that kind of led me on this quest as well. And okay, sometimes I've talked about this a million times, but I guess every time I talk about it, I don't realize how hard it's going to be until I start doing it. And now I'm starting to get choked up a little bit about it, but I'll get through it. When I was about 15 years old, we were living in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, and my stepfather, my mother had remarried. My stepfather was overseas because he was in the military. So he was overseas, and he's supposed to go over there. The way it works is they go over there and get ready. This is in Germany. Go over and get ready, and then we follow. The family follows later after he gets situated. So he went over there. So we're in Atlanta, Georgia, and we decide to, or my mother decides to babysit a girl from a neighbor girl. She's like 8 or something like that. It's the first time. We really didn't know her and stuff, but the parents needed someone to babysit, and my mother said, okay, we'll babysit her. So she ended up taking my brother's room to sleep in that night. And then my brother ended up sleeping in bed with me. And I just remember we were woken up by paramedics. Some stranger, was in my bed over me, kind of shaking me. And I look up and I'm wondering what's going on. And the whole room is perforated with red and blue lights that are going off. And it's, I'm disoriented. I don't know what's going on. And I can hear screaming in the next room. So they wake me up. There was actually 2 paramedics because I realized that there wasn't just one. The one was waking me up. The other one was on the other side, waking my brother up. So they wake us up and they go, come on, son, let's go. We got to go downstairs. And they pick us up and we got to get dressed real quick and put some clothes on. And they start to push us down the hallway, and I can hear commotion all over the place downstairs, and you can tell that there's a lot of people in the house, in the apartment. And as they push us by my mother's room, which was right next, the screaming was coming from her, and it's blood curdling screaming. It's like she is terrified. And as they push us down the hallway and we stop by my mom's room, I kind of pause and I look, and I can see that she's naked and she's trying to cover up, and a woman is there with a blanket trying to get close to her, trying to put it on her. I didn't get time to stop or try to help, because my first instinct is to go help my mother. And before that happened, though, the paramedic just kind of pushed me, and he pushed me down the stairs. Come on, son, let's go downstairs. And it turns out, I mean, they're trying to get my mother covered, but she's terrified of anybody coming into the room. So they get us downstairs and outside, and there's police cars everywhere. They had state police, they had local police. They're just everywhere. And and it turns out that they told us later what's going on, because I didn't know what was still going on. A man had entered our apartment. He had come in through the screen of the window and came upstairs. He put his hand on the doorknob of the little girl, my brother's room, checked in on her. They know from the fingerprints. His fingerprints were found on our doorknob, and he must have looked in on me and my brother. And he went to my mother's room and he raped her. He raped her 3 times during the night. So even after raping her the first time, he didn't leave. Obviously he's used to this. He's comfortable doing it because he didn't leave. He stayed around, and he ended up raping her 3 times during the night. And the reason that she didn't fight back is because he put a gun to her head and said, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to kill your kids. So yeah, it's kind of tough to talk about. Because I'm thinking about.
Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk about it, or just, we can?
I do. Well, I've talked about it before. I'll get through it, because I just think about what my mother went through.
Okay.
And this is the person that I love. I love her to death.
Okay.
So she did what she had to do. In order to save her kids, she put herself last. Thank God he didn't kill her. When he was finished, he left, and he didn't hurt us either. But the whole time when I'm down in the police car, and we didn't see my mother for a while, they took her away for evaluation. You can understand what she's going through or whatever. So we stayed with a friend of hers for a while. But the whole time I'm thinking, why would God allow bad things like this to happen to good people? Because my mother is the most honest, the most good person I can think of in this world. And a lot of people say free will, free will for the whole human species and stuff. He can't get involved or whatever. But that wasn't good enough for me. I had to keep looking. And that was a major thing that set me on my path too, to try to read and discover everything I could. So the Bible was there. So I started reading things that the pastors and priests and everything told me not to. They said, don't read anything other than the Bible, because it's just the devil trying to confuse you. Well, I used to believe that. Now I don't. Now it's just fear, control. So I started reading everything I could. I started reading extra biblical things, like the Apocrypha, all the Gnostics, which I have here. Everything dealing with the Bible, because I figured, if I stayed close to biblical text, then maybe it's not, the devil trying to fool me. A major one is the book of Enoch. I think that's very important for most people. I don't know why that was taken out of the Bible. It's still part of the Ethiopian Bible, but that would show a lot more people that I think that the angels are aliens, because it kind of just describes them. So anyway, this is what set me on my path. I don't know. Is there a more specific question that you would want me to answer about that?
No, that's perfect. Let's move on. And I want to know how important I'm just based on your research in your book, how important are the 3,000 cuneiform tablets that was founded in Iraq? To the history of the humanity.
Right. Like for me, right? And that was like jackpot. right? So I'm reading everything. I even in college, I took world religions because I wanted to learn everything there. But even after that, in my 20s and 30s, I started reading everything I could. I even started reading things that were not pseudo-biblical, but were outside the Bible, but more religions, like the Quran. I read that cover to cover. There's a lot of different things that are very, very interesting about that. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. I started reading stuff like the Colburn Bible, all these ancient texts. But I hit pay dirt, so to speak, the jackpot, when I found the cuneiform tablets. Now, the cuneiform tablets, I didn't find until my 40s. And basically, that was through the works of Zecharia Sitchin, which most people do. Now, a lot of people might roll their eyes when they hear about Zecharia Sitchin, because when he came on the scene, he was a big deal, still is a big deal. But a lot of people started questioning his research. I still don't think he gets enough credit, because if it wasn't for Zecharia Sitchin, and none of us would be talking about this. The only people that would be talking about this are a few curators of some museums or some archaeologists somewhere. But the public would not know about this. So Zecharia Sitchin brought the cuneiform tablets to the forefront of the public. So he actually still needs a lot more credit, even if people seem to criticize some of his research. I mean, we're all not perfect. We're all trying to work towards something. So maybe his research wasn't exactly perfect, but you don't know that. You just go in and you do your best. And that's what he did. I think he's awesome. But cuneiform tablets were first discovered in 1849 in Nineveh, Iraq. And they basically laid undiscovered or undeciphered for a while. Probably the first one to decipher something was the guy that brought them back to the British Museum of London, and that would be Dr. George Smith. He was an Assyriologist for the museum, and he wrote his book, which I got some of the books here, not all of them, but he wrote his book, The Chaldean Account of Genesis. And very, very interesting. I read this book too, and I cover all these books in my book. I in The Identity of God. What I did is I read these and then I kind of summarized them so that kind of like Cliff Notes, or kind of like a cheat sheet for people that if they didn't want to read all these books, maybe they can get something out of it by reading my one book, But if you look at the date here, he first published this in 1876. It's not 1976, it's 1876. And he basically covers a lot of the cuneiform tablets there that he deciphered. That's how long it's been, but it didn't really get popular. I mean, he's an Assyriologist. They're a very close knit group of people, so it's not going to the public. But most people don't know this. They don't know all this stuff exists. They don't know that the cuneiform tablets exist, or if they do, they just think that they're old writings. They don't know that the Bible, especially Genesis, is taken from these stories found in these cuneiform tablets, which are millennia older. So it's imperative that we look at the cuneiform tablets when comparing them to Scripture, to the Bible, and you get more information in the cuneiform tablets than you do in the Bible. They kind of fill in some of the gaps. So yeah, it's imperative. You would just have to learn that. And then the way I did that basically is by reading. First of all, I read all of Zecharia Sitchin's 14 books, right? And I read some of his unpublished work that his niece published after his death in 2010. But I have to say, I want to go here with Zecharia Sitchin, even though I still think he's a hero, right? I have to say that I found some things out why people criticize some of his work. And two major things are that in his book, The Lost Book of Enki, which people think is actual transcriptions, translations from the cuneiform tablets. First of all, they're not. It's a story basically that he put together based on his translations that he did from the cuneiform tablets. So it's got a lot of info in there, but it's not word for word the same. He filled in gaps and kind of made stuff up in between. That's why they criticize it. But there's two things about his work, like in the Lost Book of Enki. Now, Zecharia Sitchin was Jewish in his Jewish faith. So I think he was trying to make the story of the Anunnaki, the gods, in the cuneiform tablets. I think he was trying to make them fit his Jewish belief, because he created in his book a being that the Anunnakis worshipped called the creator of all, and which would make sense in even in the Christian faith. It would make sense. Okay, the Anunnaki are angels and God is above them, and that makes sense. Well, I looked after reading all his books, and I looked all through the Oxford Sumerian lexicon, which is the ETCSL website. And I scoured it for days, weeks, months. I was obsessed to do this, and then trying to find these answers that I had, or the questions that I had, answers to the questions, and the so the creator of all. The only thing I could find in the creator of all throughout all of them that I found was in reference to Enki, who is a character in the cuneiform tablets, but no creator of all that the Anunnaki revered or worshipped, or nothing like that. So obviously, Zecharia made that up. And then second was an emissary from the creator of all to the Anunnaki. His name was Galzu. And supposedly he showed up. He shows up twice in Zechariah's writings. One time in person in a ship that supposedly, you know, in their technology and stuff, shows up, and he says he's an emissary of Anu, who was the king of the Anunnaki. And that's one time. And then another time he shows up in Enki's dream and kind of interferes with his dream. But when I've searched and stuff, I don't find anyone, no Galzu. There was a Galzu in the Canaanite, and he was a minor god in the Canaanite pantheon. But nothing like he's described in Zechariah's writings. So I have to put those out. I found that out afterwards. So, but Zechariah's writings are imperative too, to try to understand all this, I think, you know, to put it all together. But you have to know where he made stuff up and where he didn't. And I continue to do that. And I discovered it kind of afterwards. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed there, but you can find it if you want to read the cuneiform for yourself. Well, it was translated in English for me. I don't know if you can go to Portuguese or not. I never looked. But if you go to the ETCSL website, that's the, you can Google it. It'll show up and it'll take you there. It's kind of hard to navigate, but you can get used to it if you play with it. You can read the translations for yourself. So, but they're imperative. The cuneiform tablets, basically, in my view, are the lost history of the Hebrews. And that's where Genesis was written from. So it's fundamental, if that answers your question.
Yes. So you talking about the Sumerian tablets and the Old Testament, especially the Genesis. Can you do just a brief comparative analysis between two of them? Because it looks like the Bible would be just a commercial book, let's say a commercial book.
Right.
And the Old Testament in the Sumerian tablets, as you said, is a history before the Bible.
Right.
The Bible for commercial objectives. So what do you think, this comparison between the Bible and the Sumerian tablets and the Old Testament?
Right. I see Genesis basically as like the last chapter or a much later chapter in the story of everything of the Anunnaki in the Sumerian or the cuneiform tablets. And what people have to understand too is that when we say cuneiform tablets, this encompassed not only the very first civilization that we know of, the Sumerians, right? But there was many empires and civilizations that came afterwards. You got the Sumerians, the Akkadians, then after that, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, which are mentioned in the Bible. The Hittites, some of the Persian, they all used the same form of writing, which is the cuneiform writing. And these tablets basically spanned all of those civilizations. And so you can imagine how much the immense time that these things have been around. What was the question again? I'm sorry, I started to get lost. Oh yeah, we're comparing it to Genesis.
Comparing the Sumerian tablets and the Old Testament.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
No problem.
So I see Genesis as the last chapter because there's so many things that came before that. But there's some things in Genesis, like, okay, I'll give you an example, like Adam and Eve, right? The creation of man. Adam and Eve were the first man and woman created in the Bible, as well as in the cuneiform tablets. Now it was Adamu, right, which is Adam. Just take the U off, Adam. Adamu, and it was Tiamat. This also goes into the cosmology. I kind of want to go into that too, because Zecharia Sitchin too thought. I'm going to get off that topic. I'll come back to it. Zecharia Sitchin talked about the Enuma Elish, which is the 7 tablets of creation, which are like God created the earth and and heavens and stuff in 7 days. So in the cuneiform tablets, there's 7 tablets of creation. And Zecharia Sitchin, it was kind of like a war of the gods in the cuneiform tablets. But Zecharia Sitchin was certain that it was a metaphor. This war of the gods was a metaphor for the creation of our solar system. And he might be onto something, because I too think that it might be. Because when they're mentioning the gods, it's actually the planets that we know of. And one of the major theories that Zecharia Sitchin talks about is that the Earth was once part of the same planet as the asteroid belt that we have now. A lot of people say, "Oh, that's a bunch of hooey, that's not true," or whatever. Because according to the story, right, this planet or object or whatever that came into our solar system early on, it was the home of the Anunnaki, right? And there was a planet where the asteroid belt is, and they call that Tiamat. And there was no Earth yet, just that planet where the asteroid belt is. And this planet came so close that one of its moons actually struck the planet Tiamat and cleaved it in half. And half of that planet, a big chunk of it, was thrown into an orbit closer to the sun, which eventually became Earth. And then the other half was torn and crushed by the immense gravity of this planet coming by and strung out. The Sumerians and the Akkadians and all that, they called it the hammered bracelet, but we call it the asteroid belt today. And then this big, huge planet was captured by our sun. So it doesn't have a typical orbit like the rest of the planets. It has an orbit like a comet. So it comes in our solar system once every 3,600 years, according to Sitchin, and goes way out into deep space. And you won't see it again for another 3,600 years when it comes back into our solar system. And when it does, it usually wreaks havoc on the gravitational forces of the other planets. And depending where the Earth is, how close it is to it when it comes through, because the Earth might be on the other side of the sun or something at that time. It can cause earthquakes, maybe pole shifts, volcano eruptions, all kinds of stuff, or maybe nothing at all. Maybe because according to Sitchin, the Great Flood in the Bible was caused by this, because they knew it was going to cause problems. That it might have taken the ice caps off of the poles into the ocean, causing great storms and stuff like that. But it's an interesting theory but it's also, it has evidence to support it, which is, most people don't understand that, because I mean, Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin of Caltech University have already mathematically proven that there's another planet in our solar system. And because of the perturbations on all the other planets, they can measure this mathematically. So they know it's out there. Now, I got to say that those two astrophysicists, those scientists from Caltech, do not think it is Nibiru. They don't, agree to Zecharia Sitchin's writings or anything like that. But they know that there's an object out there. They might think it's in the Oort cloud, but if it is, it's got to be a lot bigger than what Sitchin said. Sitchin said it probably 4 to 5 times larger than Earth. Who knows? But that's not the only evidence. There's also like a fingerprint to the planets, and it's kind of weird like this. It's the deuterium to H2O ratio, like in our oceans. Deuterium is heavy water, and the ratio in our oceans actually match the water ice that NASA probes have measured on some of the asteroids in the asteroid belt. Now, this deuterium to helium ratio, or deuterium to H2O, not helium, deuterium to H2O ratio does not match the water ice that they find at the poles on Mars. Nor does it fit, it doesn't match the water vapor that had been measured from Venus. But somehow that it matches, the same water ice on the asteroids matches Earth's oceans. So there is a lot of there's evidence to support it, but of course people don't want to talk about that. Of course, scientists aren't going to put their hat on that. They'll be ridiculed, even if it does kind of make sense. But we're not scientists, right? We can look into things and we can say things that they can't. But going back to a comparison, Adam and Eve were created. There's Adamu and Tiamat, but that's all the Bible says is those two. The cuneiform tablets say that Adamu and Tiamat were the first created, but then there were 6 more females and 6 more males created immediately after. So you didn't start with 1 base pair. You started with 2 or 7 base pairs. Seven. I'm talking with my hands. 7 base pairs. So you had 7 males and 7 females. So it makes sense when Cain kills Abel and goes into, is banished to the east of the land of Nod, and he marries. He takes a wife. Well, it makes a lot more sense when there's a lot more people on the planet, and they could be having children, and one of those daughters, would marry Cain. So the cuneiform tablets, there's a lot of things that happen in the cuneiform tablets that it just gives you an insight. And when you start reading Genesis, once you read those cuneiform tablets and you read Genesis, I mean, there is no doubt at all that God and the angels, Satan and the demons, which are angels but fallen, and are all of the Anunnaki from the cuneiform tablets. I mean, there's no doubt. So there's a lot of things that happen in the Bible. Like okay, let's say Adam and Eve were created, but then you also have like the Tower of Babel. You have the Great Flood, Noah and the Great Flood. All these things are in the cuneiform tablets, but they're in Genesis as well, but very, very brief. So how did all these stories, why are they so brief in the Bible, but yet there's a lot more information in the cuneiform tablets? It's because obviously the cuneiform tablets are far older, and Genesis was taken from them, kind of like a brief summary of what went on in the cuneiform tablets. And where people get mixed up, and it gets confusing. It really does. Even now, it's very, very hard to tell, because I tried to find the identity of Jesus. I tried after this, and it gets very, very difficult in who he compares to, like in the with the Anunnaki. But the Anunnaki themselves, it gets very, very confusing on who's who. For example, again, in the Garden of Eden, you had Adam and Eve, and they're going to eat of the tree of knowledge, and God said, don't do that. If you do that, you're going to die. And it was the serpent that ended up saying, you won't die. He goes, he just doesn't want you to be like him. So they eat of the fruit anyway, and they didn't die, not physically. Now the church kind of spins it and says, well, you'll die spiritually. That when you're dead, you don't get to live on. You're just gone, but that's not what it says. I mean, if you read it in a literal sense, it's God told them the wrong thing. And it was the serpent that told them the right thing. Now the church teaches that the serpent is Satan in the Garden of Eden. But now I say not so fast. When you start reading the cuneiform tablets, it's different, because when you read the Bible, whenever you see the word God, it's translated from the word Elohim. Elohim is plural. It is not singular. And so when they said that man was created, God created man in his image, it's the Elohim created man in his image, in their image. And even in the Bible, there's a direct quote, let's make man in our image and after our likeness, right? It still says that in the Bible. It says our, after all these translations and all these years and stuff, it still contains the plural, not the singular. So, and it's literal. Now the church will spin that and say that they're talking about the Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost as one. But it's a direct quote from the cuneiform tablets too. It's in there. Let's make man in our image and after our likeness, as a pantheon of gods. Now, the agreement, the covenant that the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, he made a covenant with the Hebrews, and he said, even in the first commandment, he said, you should have no other gods before me. And that's almost saying there are other gods, right? And the church will spin that and say that it's a metaphor for fame or, money, greed, stuff like that. But I read it literally. It's literal. There are other gods. He goes, but I'm your God. You don't have any other gods before me. It kind of even insinuates that you can have and believe in other gods, but not before me. I'm number one. I'm your God. And that's the covenant that he made. And I go on to explain, I don't want to, give away the punchline of the book, but I go on to explain at the end of the book who I think the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses is. And I show all the coincidences or clues that I hope add up to that. There's no doubt about that. So,
well, it's gonna be one of my questions, man. Well, people have now to read your book. Well, but let's say that get another question. So, God was an alien.
I believe so. Yes.
Who created the human race? Is right?
Yes, sir. By genetic engineering.
What purpose?
Say that again.
What is the purpose to create the human?
The purpose was to work, right? Because according to the stories in the cuneiform tablets, they came to Earth to work, to do this thing. Now, Zechariah Sitchin said that they mined gold, but there's nothing in the cuneiform tablets that say that. He might have been right, but we don't know. It just doesn't say that. But whatever the purpose was, it was very, very important to them. And they had the work being done by what they called a group of beings called the Agigi. And kind of sounds funny, but Agigi is described maybe as a lesser form of gods. It's still debatable whether they're a lesser form of gods, like maybe, like there's a caste system, like there's a royal a much higher level of Anunnaki, and then a lower level, just like, in a caste system in India, you would have the elite, but they're all people. They're still the same beings. But I question that too, because they might be totally different beings altogether. Interesting because when you read the Quran, there's a section in there with the jinn. I don't know if you're familiar with the jinn or not, but in the Quran, different than the Bible and the Torah, right? The jinn were created before mankind, and they were created through smokeless fire instead of earth or clay, right? Smokeless fire. And so when man was created, Allah, God, told the jinn that they had to bow down to man. Well, some of them didn't want to, because they were built with free will, just like we were. So it's kind of weird to see a comparison there, that the Igigi were doing all the work. Now, the problem is that they rebelled. They were working here so much and so hard. They go, this stuff is tough. We don't want to do this anymore. So they rebelled against the Anunnaki, the higher royal Anunnaki. So that's where one of the Anunnaki, the princes, there's two princes. One was in charge of the other, but the other one was, they're both sons of the king that were on somewhere else. You can call it Nibiru. You can call it another universe. You can call it a dimension. We don't know where they come from, but they're still alien. Whether they come from this physical universe, or if they come from another dimension, a spiritual dimension or world or whatever, they're still alien. If they're not born on Earth, then they're alien. So they rebelled, and one of them said, "Hey, I can fix this." He goes, "Let's not kill," because one of them wanted to kill a lot of these Igigi in order to use fear to put them back to work. The other one, he said, "I can fix this. I can create a worker." And so he set out and they spliced their DNA with the DNA of a hominid that was already here on the planet in order to create us, so that we could follow orders. And they put us to work. We took over the work of the Igigi, and eventually. And if you even look at the root word of the word worship, so when we worship God, what does that mean? The root word is work. We work for God. That's the root word of worship. So we're workers. You can call us slaves, whatever. We still might be doing it today. I mean, we don't know. Because they might still be here today, or at least a couple of them, or maybe just one. Don't know. But they're supposed to be coming back. Anyway, yeah, so I hope that answered your question. If there's any other questions, I can.
Yeah, I have plenty of questions here. And so, who was Jesus?
That's the number one question, man. I've looked into that, and it's very, very hard. I had 169 pages written of the second book that I was looking into it, but I didn't really have that epiphany that I did in this book about who the God of Abraham and Moses was. Certain things I can tell you about the God of Moses, though, is that it's interesting. Let's just put it that way. It's interesting. There's a lot of coincidences. Enki, the one that created us, and the cuneiform tablets, right? Enki, especially he's a geneticist. He's supposed to be wisest of all the Anunnaki. He's the one that created us in the cuneiform tablets. He's the one that warned Noah of the great flood. Also, in comparison to the Bible, it was God that did that, right? In the cuneiform tablets, in the Babylonians, it's Utnah pushed him, but it's the same story. That's Noah. Also, his symbol, he had a symbol basically, which was the serpent. The serpent was his symbol for him and all of his lineage, his all this prodigy under him. They were the serpents, the clan basically of the serpents, right? A lot of people might see that as satanic, but I'd say not so fast, because even on the other side of Enki, Enlil's was the other prince in his lineage. Enlil had an epitaph that is just like Satan's. He was called Lord of the Air, and where Satan is Prince of the Air. He had a lot of, and he was the one that wanted to kill a lot of them. He rules by a lot of fear. So it gets really, really, now he was God in the Garden of Eden. Enlil was, the one that was rules by fear and all that stuff. So it's interesting. And sometimes in the Bible, the roles get reversed, and sometimes they don't. So it's very hard to, when you hear the word God or Satan, it's very hard to determine who is who, because they're titles. They're not names. They're titles that switch from person to person or being to being. And if you ask one, who's God? And they'd be like, I am. But if you ask the other one, I'm God. Well, who's Satan? Oh, that one is. Depending on who you talk to. But we think it's just one person, when the Bible shows a dichotomy of, decision making, and it gets confusing. Anyway, and Enki's symbol was a serpent. Now, there's a reason that Moses' staff became a serpent. It became a serpent, and when Pharaoh's magicians in Egypt threw their staffs down, and they became serpents. Well, Moses threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh to prove that, he has power from God, and it became a serpent and devoured all the other serpents, proving that his was the greatest serpent, his God. And also, when Moses had the Hebrews in the wilderness, when they left Egypt and they were in the Sinai wilderness, a lot of them were being bit by fiery serpents and dying. So Moses prayed, and God ended up telling him to create the Nahustan. And the Nahustan was a brass serpent that he was told to put on a pole. And whoever was bit by that, if they looked upon this Nahustan, this brass serpent, they wouldn't die. So it's almost like you're worshiping that serpent. And it gets really interesting. That's just one of them. And I have to say this, okay, that maybe I'm giving away too much from the book, but when Moses was talking to God on Mount Sinai, it showed that maybe he believed that there was more than one God as well, because he didn't even know God's name. He said, when I go back down to the Hebrews down at the foot of Mount Sinai, he goes, who can I say who sent me? Who are you? And God responded to him in Hebrew. It was Ea, Asher, Ea. And, it's I think it's been loosely translated, and I think incorrectly, as I am who I am. Now, Enki is a title. Enki means Lord of Earth. It was given to him supposedly when he came here, right? But his given name was Ea, which is interesting. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. But like I said, I put all these coincidences together, like a ton of them, that makes it more than just a coincidence. Did he say I am who I am? Or did he say I am Ea? And actually told him his name. So there's a lot of things in there, that a lot of coincidences that would make you think that, okay, this isn't a coincidence. Hopefully that gives you some insight to the book.
Yes, more questions than answers,
Yeah. like I said, when you answer one question, it brings up 6 or 7 more questions.
Yes, that's totally true. Can we say that the flood was a deliberate action by God the alien to, wipe out an experiment that went wrong?
Right. Like the Nephilim and the giants and stuff like that. Now, I believe so. Because, if you know the story in the Bible, the fallen angels basically saw our women as very fair, and they wanted to come down and take them as wives. I kind of liken it to sailors in the Navy being on shore leave. Let's say, they're young, full of testosterone. They're away from all the females. They're only on the ship by themselves, so when they get shore leave, they go crazy. Now, I guess they've been away from home for so long that when they started looking at our females, and we were made with their DNA, at least half or whatever, so we look like they do. So when they started looking at our females and liking them, they wanted to come down, and they conspired basically to come down and take them as wives. Now the leader, Enlil, the one that ruled with fear and stuff, was like, you don't do that. You know, I can try to compare it, you know, like I don't think chimpanzees are close to humans, but if a captain made landfall, you know, say in Africa, and all the sailors went out and started mating with chimpanzees, I think the captain would be very upset about that. So I liken it to that, you know, like you don't mix the species, even though they look like us. You don't do that. There's a no-no. So therefore they became fallen. They were the fallen angels. But the flood, see, and what they did is like when those angels ended up mating with our humans, they had offspring, and these offspring, they weren't born as giants. They were born as normal babies, you know, and then grew into giants. Because a lot of people say, well, there's no way that a woman could give birth to a giant. Well, that's true. But there's nothing saying that they had to be gigantic babies, you know. They could be regular sized babies and grow into giants. And supposedly these giants were, you know, they were very lustful, they're very greedy, they're very violent, and they were wreaking havoc over mankind all over the earth. So the Anunnaki, and I'm thinking Enlil at this time, not Enki, Enlil, the one that rules with fear. It might be a collaboration between all the Anunnaki when we hear the word God in the Bible. It might be a whole, you know, a consensus of them getting together talking about it. But they ended up wanting the flood to happen. In the cuneiform tablets, it was going to happen anyway. The flood was going to happen. So they didn't cause it to happen, but they allowed it to happen without warning mankind, except Enki warned, or God, you know, warned Noah and his family, which he kind of broke the rules when he did that. And Enlil was upset because he didn't want mankind created in the first place. He got outvoted basically by the council. So there was a council too, over important decisions. A council was made. He got outvoted. He didn't want mankind created. He didn't want Noah and his family to live. He wanted mankind wiped out, along with the Nephilim. So, but the Nephilim were wreaking havoc, and they had to wipe them out. But this was going to happen anyway, supposedly. And the decree was put out that they weren't allowed to warn mankind at all. Just let them perish. Well, Enki ended up doing that. You know, in the flood, not sure what caused it. You know, like I said, Zechariah Sitchin speculates that it was this planetary body that came close to the Earth and, you know, created gravitational forces that caused calamities and caused the Great Flood. Perhaps, who knows? I mean, we don't know what caused it, but it was to wipe out the Nephilim and supposedly to wipe out mankind too. That Enki went against his brother's advice and told Noah, because in the cuneiform tablets, Noah was actually fathered by Enki, the Anunnaki, I mean, of God. You know, he was fathered. That's why in the book of Enoch, he, you know, his father was like, my son doesn't look like everybody else. He looks like one of the Nephilim. He looks like one of the angels and stuff. Because I'm pretty sure everyone was darker skinned and stuff. But in the book of Enoch, Noah is described as having white skin and white, long locks of white hair. So we know he wasn't albino. A lot of people want to think that he was African, but with, you know, kinky hair, but albino. But it's his long locks of long hair. Now, I'm not trying to make this a racial thing. I'm just saying what's in there. You know, I don't care. But his skin was white. His eyes lit up the room, you know, and were like the sky. So I would think blue or pale blue, you know, but he looked different than everybody else. And they had to go all the way back to Enoch. His father went, I'm missing Noah's father's name right now, but he went to his father, Methuselah, and Methuselah went to Enoch, his father, who was with God, and somehow contacted him and said, hey, look at this kid. He doesn't look like, you know, his father. What's up with this? And he came back with an answer saying, tell Noah to take him as his son, because it is. But in the cuneiform tablets, he was fathered by God or Enki, you know. That might be the reason that he was spared and his lineage spared, because he wasn't just pure of heart. He was pure of genetic material. He was the most pure out of all the people on the earth to the original source. So, I mean, we don't know. There's still a lot of questions.
Yes, there is. There are a lot of questions. And to finish our interview, the great question,
Yeah.
when will they return?
Yes, that's the number 2 question. Number 1 is, who was Jesus? I don't know. Number 2, when will they return? Now, Zecharia Sitchin, he seemed to come up with a date, every 3,600 years. So he believes the last time they were here, I can't remember the last time he was here, but he believes they're coming back around 2900 AD, which is still far in the future from now. Now, I was looking at some other things, maybe come up with some alternative dates. In the Colburn Bible, which I read, which are ancient Egyptian and Celtic texts, in one of the Egyptian tales there in the Colburn Bible, it had to do with the plagues, the 10 plagues of Egypt. And during the 10 plagues of Egypt, the people saw in the sky a heavenly body that was not the sun. It was as big as the sun, but was not the sun. Because there was times that they clearly saw the sun on one side and the object on the other. And they called this thing the destroyer. If that was Zecharia Sitchin's Nibiru, or planet, or whatever, and it comes around every 3,600 years, then it makes sense that if it was there at that time, it would come back the next 3,600 years. So the consensus, a lot of scholars debate, even if the Exodus actually happened. I believe it did. And if it did, like Zecharia Sitchin, Velikovsky, some other people put their 2 cents in, and a kind of a consensus is around 1433 BC. And simple math would give you a date. If you subtracted 1433 from 3600, you would get a date of 2167, which is closer than 2900. But still, I think all of us talking now would be gone by then. But that's just one date. There's some other dates I put in the book, that who knows? Who knows when they're showing up? That, like the Bible says, God says in the Bible, it says, he's going to, Jesus, he's going to come and defeat the thief in the night. No man knows the time. So who knows? We'll just have to wait and see.
No, I just have a little one question. Well,
Sure.
you're Christian, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. How has your research, affect your faith and understanding of divine creation?
I get this question a lot. I was talking about it last night, or no, 2 nights ago. I had like I'm a home inspector, as well as I work for Homeland Security right now. That's my full-time job, but I got some part-time jobs. One's a home inspector. So I was at a real estate meeting, and one of the people there bought my book and read it and started asking questions. So I had to talk about this, right? I don't talk about this to the congregation or people in my church. I listen to what's being preached. I scrutinize it. I disagree a lot, but it has affected my faith. All I know is, and again, I don't have all the answers, but I do know that the Anunnaki are the angels in God, and Jesus is of them as well, right? So I believe that, but it doesn't take anything away from the message that you get from the Bible. The message is still the same. I mean, if you were a king and you come in, and you want people to follow you, you would reward them for following you. And if not, if you didn't bend the knee, they'd probably kill you and get rid of you. So really, there's nothing different. If God or Jesus is going to rule, you either pledge faith to him or you're going to be gone. But he rewards you, he rewards you because you're of his people. So the message is still the same. I just look at it differently, and I am I scrutinize who I'm going to talk to about it. And I just have to be careful so that they don't burn me at the stake.
Man, it was a great conversation. I think we could spend a whole day talking
Oh yeah.
about it. I will encourage people to buy your book. This book is wonderful, wonderful. If you want to know more questions,
Yeah.
you go to read this book because it's amazing. And I hope you have a second one because
Man, I'm telling you, I can tell you this. I wrote 169 pages of the second book, and I was going to, and I got people telling me all the time, "When's that book coming? When's that book coming?" And I was taking exams for my home inspector test online, and I couldn't bridge, kind of like we're connected here. I couldn't bridge to the test, so I had to have someone from India take over my computer, and they changed all kinds of things, and I lost everything.
whoa.
So the whole book, everything that I had it's gone, and I don't know if I'll ever do another one. Maybe.
Man, that's
maybe.
why I have a backup in a pen drive, you know.
Yeah.
or an AG.
Yeah, yes, sir. I should have. I'm not that smart.
No, you are. So Jeffrey, thank you very much for your talking. It's amazing. It was a very pleasure to meet you in person, you know.
Yeah.
God
Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure on my side
bless you.
too.
Yes. And I hope your people buy your books and read it because it's amazing. And I will leave
Thank you.
all your contacts in the description of the video to people know a little more about your work. So once again, thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And I hope you have a good day.
Yes, thank you very much.